So this title comes from an unelicited use of the placeholder in Hadza. This is our life now. This is an English translation. This is our life now. It is being lost. Our whatchamacallit, our tradition. Either the person had forgotten a Hadza word for tradition or didn't know a Hadza word that means tradition because they typically use a Swahili term for that. So and so I liked this quote because, of course, Hadza language is in danger of not being spoken, and it's only spoken in three camps by children as their L1, according to Jeremy Coburn's recent study. So, in a way, to learn about placeholders, this is, we have a limited opportunity to do this potentially. So, but this talk is about what to say when you don't know what to say in Hadza. And authors here, this is a paper that has been accepted to be published in De Gruyter book about placeholders, and we are looking at two languages in Botswana plus Hadza. So this is the outline of the talk. I'm going to briefly define what placeholders are, and then I'm going to spend a fair bit of time explaining why we're looking at Hadza placeholders as opposed to any, as a topic to look at, and then show you some instances of their grammatical characteristics and discuss their functional use. And then this will be about 25 slides, just so those of you that are antsy to get through to the end, you'll know where we are. So placeholders are considered a subset of a type of word called fillers, and this is a Packendorf and Rose book on fillers and placeholders. Placeholders substitute for words like English thingy or thingamajig would be replacements for a noun. So and so would be replace a person. Blah 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 might replace a whole sentence. What was his talk about? Oh, he said blah blah blah. So I think that would count as a placeholder. Now this differs from other kinds of fillers like hesitators, like when you're thinking about what to say, not thinking about a particular word or trying to remember a particular word. And it also differs from attention devices like and I should point out that an device is often a click, like meaning I'm about to start. I'm about to start speaking. People may not have a meta-linguistic awareness that that's how they're using the placeholder, but that is how it's often used. And placeholders then differ also from back channels. Back channels could be things like In West Africa, a lot of parts of West Africa have a back channel that's a lateral click, which is similar to like yes, yes, I'm listening to you. I agree with what you're saying. So why look at Hadza placeholders? It's a little bit of a funny story because I'm mainly a phonetician and a historical linguist, not a morphosyntactician. But I saw a call for papers in Linguist List in 2024. And in this call for papers about placeholders, there was a claim that they are mostly spoken language phenomena. However, notably, their use as a variable seems rather linked to formal written language. And I thought, formal written language? I know that there's a placeholder in Hadza. And the reason why I remembered this word was because when I was checking vocabulary that Dorothea Blake had collected in the 1930s, and then published posthumously in a dictionary in 1956, came across this word that was supposed to mean tomatoes. He spelled hinamepe. And when I asked, do you really have a word for tomatoes? Because, I know you don't have tomatoes here, traditionally. And I was told, no, this means thingamajigs, or, it's a word to replace when you don't know what the word means. So I thought that was a very funny translation error on the part of Dorothea Blake. And furthermore, in this call for papers, they said, so far, talks on placeholders in English, German, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Georgian, Hebrew, North Siberian languages, Japanese, and Chinese are planned. Further talks or posters on any language of the world, including Creole languages, are welcome. Now, what struck me here is that, okay, no African languages whatsoever, right? So I said, you know what? This is the exact sort of thing where my young colleagues should present a paper at this conference because not only are click languages and hunter-gatherer languages fairly marginalized, but I would say that pretty much all African languages are marginalized when it comes to linguistics, despite the fact that, yes, African languages have played a big role in terms of phonology of tone, phonology of ATR, harmony, certain topics, but for your general average random topic, people can publish a book and not include a single African language, and no one will ever criticize them for that. So here is one recent survey about that includes placeholders, the Pockendorf and Rose. And Brigitte Pockendorf has worked on African languages before, although her primary specialty is on Siberian languages. Now this survey, book-length survey, only covers 16 languages. And you may notice that none of them are African. Okay, so this is just proving my point. Second study, also very, very recent, 56 languages. We actually have 3 African languages. I've marked them on the map where these languages are located. We have 2 Dogon languages, Jamse and Tomoso, and 1 Songhai language. So, you know, Africa is a big continent, and this is a pretty small sample. In all 3 of these languages, the placeholder comes from a word that means thing. That's kind of one of the findings of that study. Now, Africa's linguistic diversity is huge. Here's a map from Harold Hammerstrom's survey in 2018 showing you these different regions. And of course, the previous study only samples language from a single region. So we're going to be talking about a language from this eastern savanna area. Africa is at least a quarter of the world's languages. It's at least 2,000 spoken languages and a lot more sign languages as well. Not only that, a more conservative look at that would say there's at least 20 distinct lineages that are of spoken and at least 20 distinct lineages of signed languages. Tom Gilderman, who can tell us more about his survey, he talks about classificatory units. So there are at least 50 spoken language classificatory units. So, you know, when we're looking at a sample that might sample multiple Indo-European languages, but only a couple of these 50 classificatory units in Africa, I would say it's not a very good typological sample. And this is a problem of linguistic typology generally because many languages like Hadza just haven't had enough linguistic attention. So that's the first part of the talk, the why look at Hadza for placeholders. It just irks me that languages like Hadza get ignored. And also I thought when you see a call for papers, very often that call, the conference is going to get turned into a publication. And the people who presented at that conference are going to be the people who have chapters in the volume. So if they're generally, and in this case it's true, they did not ask for people to submit papers to the volume after the conference. There were enough papers from the conference for a volume. So if you want to be involved in cross-linguistic volumes of this nature, you kind of have to jump on board at the time of the conference and not the time of the planned publication. So what can we know about the form of the Hadza placeholders? This paper is under review at the moment, but will hopefully come out in published form fairly soon. Well, as those of you who took part in the course in Turin know, Hadza has a sex-based gender system. Both feminine and masculine are marked. There are 2 number categories, singular and plural. Nominal gender marking and agreement through clitics, commonly dubbed PGN or person gender number markers, occurs. PGNs function as suffixes and as enclitics in Hadza. So we have the example of the 3rd feminine plural, be'e. In the copular clitic form, it's pe'e. And we'll just note from Jeremy Cobham's work that the tone realization on the suffixes and clitics is dependent of the tone on the root. So now we get to some examples. So here's two examples from natural speech. So anza ehe kobochana ina koko, so that he can start shooting something or other, or thingamajig. Person is either forgotten or unsure what was being shot at. So in this case, the placeholder is replacing an object. In the second example, hakana'a ina mechana, I went to someplace or other. I went to someplace or other, right? It's replacing a locative noun. Okay, right. As far as morphological structure, we have a base that's ina with high tone, and an affix, either me in the masculine singular, koko in the feminine singular, mebe in the feminine plural, mibi in the masculine plural. I don't know why I put the masculine first and the feminine first in the other form. We like to be gender neutral here, or I like to put the feminine first, actually. And some forms that might be expected, like ina mi koko or ina me koko, do not occur. Ina kobe does not occur for linen here. We often put an apostrophe when it's an impossible form. So there's two parts or three parts to the placeholder, because you have to have agreement. Now, our hypothesis is that there is a demonstrative base ina, and this is not the word for thing, but this is something like the contrastive determiner hina or hishina. Now remember that example of tomato example, that was spelled with an H. So in some words in Hadza, there is alternation, unexplained alternation between breathy H and glottal stop, although each of these segments is contrastive. It may be that there was some sound change in these words. And then the second morpheme, and I'll show you those words again, seems to be an associative marker. Okay, so in a word like Bonny and her people, you would have that me, that little me morpheme. Bonny mebe, Bonny and her feminine plural people. Or njegela mibi, njegela and his people. So the structure, again, you seem to have a demonstrative base and some sort of associative marker. And we'll note that cross-linguistically, demonstrative and interrogative pronouns are often a source of placeholders, as in Podleskaya's summary. So not like the other African languages surveyed where the word comes from thing, but similar to other languages in the world. But because, of course, just being a hunter-gatherer language, it does not mean that your language is weird or does not follow cross-linguistic patterns. It definitely does. Now, one thing one of the things that's interesting about Hadza placeholders is that it can also replace an adjective. So here is an elicited example. I saw a whatchamacallit leopard there. Andrew asked if you saw a tall leopard, if you saw a short leopard, but let's say you forgot the word tall, what would you say? You could use iname in the masculine singular to agree with the masculine singular leopard to replace the adjective, and that is perfectly grammatical. You can also use iname, or the placeholder, to replace a verb. So here's an example, again an elicited example. We have a lot of natural speech examples of noun replacements, but it was hard to find ones that were unambiguously replacing a verb, so that's why we elicited them. Vamusha iname qua amo. In this case, he such and suched me. Then he such and suched me. Iname here is taking verb morphology. It's taking the qua, the masculine singular object, the I, the first person singular object, and the amo, the third singular masculine postclitic, whatever we're calling that. Okay, so Hadza is interesting. It has what's called a general placeholder. That means the placeholder can replace like nouns and verbs. Cross-linguistically, in Kalima Yukagir, the placeholder le can replace nouns, verbs, and demonstrative roots. We have two Indonesian placeholders that can replace nouns, verbs, and adjectives. So Hadza, in the sense, um, has a placeholder similar to T, except I don't think the Indonesian one marks person and number, or gender and number. Other types of placeholders, cross-linguistically, seems to be a little more common, perhaps, to have specific placeholders. So ones that replace either just nouns, like in this case of komenzo, or just inanimate nouns, like in this Jamse example, things, or this Papuan Malay siapa only replaces personal names. In Manambu, we have a placeholder muggi, and it can't replace all verbs. It can only replace verbs of affect and process. So we see that Hadza, where it positions typologically and cross-linguistically in terms of it, what sort of grammatical functions it has. Now, in terms of its sociolinguistic functions, let's turn to this part of the talk. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast for anybody. You can have me slow down. The primary function, or one of the most common functions, is to replace a forgotten word, perhaps a temporarily forgotten word. But it can also be used to avoid a word when one does not want to say the word. One uses the placeholder as a euphemism. For instance, one can use the masculine singular placeholder iname to refer to a penis, or inamibi to refer to testicles. Right. Just from the gender and number, one knows which part of the anatomy is intended to refer to there. It can also be used as a strong insult. So, bami iname, that, what's his face? That really meaning that, mother, that's so and so. You know, that doesn't carry, saying that so and so doesn't carry this strong of an insult in English. So this is an aspect of placeholders that one should document, is how it's actually used. But interestingly, on the flip side, it's used as an insult but can also be used to indicate respect. So we have these vocative avoidance terms, ina ko for ina koye from sister-in-law, or ina me husband, that seem to have very similar form to the placeholder, but we don't have the may in the sister-in-law form. But these avoidance terms are meant to indicate respect to one's sister-in-law and one's husband. It's anecdotally been noted that there is a high frequency of placeholders in Hadza, and we might wonder why this is. There hasn't been any theorizing around this. We don't have any quantitative measure of how frequent placeholders are, but perhaps being a small-scale society with a dense social network, every Hadza person pretty much knows every other Hadza person. There's common ground. They live in the same place. They know the same things. So if you've temporarily forgotten a word, usually someone else knows what you're talking about, so it's not necessary to actually articulate every single noun or verb explicitly. You may have noticed this just within your own family. You can say, oh yeah, you know so-and-so, and that person will know who you're talking about. So is it possible that placeholders are more common in dense social networks or not? That's a question that remains to be seen. Unlike the call for papers that was in LinguistList, in Hadza there is no link to formal or written language and placeholders that we can see here. I think everybody would agree that linguistics needs more inclusion of marginalized languages, and that it is fun to branch out into understudied parts of linguistics. So none of us was exposed to placeholders as a part of speech to study. You just have to say, okay, fine, I'll look at it. I'm not an expert in that, but that's something I can do, you know. So it's fun to do. So thank you, and best of luck with this, that, and the other, and whatnot, and all that jazz. And that's the end of the talk.
Hey, Bonnie, thanks for that, whatever. And now we can go to questions that we may have. I noticed that you were having some connectivity blips, so I turned off everybody's video.
Oh,
If Bonnie has
sorry
any
about
more
that.
problems with her video, we can all just turn off our video. But for right now, I think that we're okay. And Mauro will start us off. He has his hand raised. So please, Mauro, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. Okay, Bonnie, thank you. It was very interesting. I have a very general question or maybe doubt. Are we sure that everybody's talking about the same thing when we talk about placeholders? Because the fact that enemy is even, I stress even subject to gender number agreement, it's a bit disturbing. I mean, it doesn't look like our placeholders in European or Western languages, call them as you like. Uh, couldn't it simply be glossed as a thing? Thing has a definite place in the lexicon of English, has a lot of problems from a, as you mentioned, from a phonological, from a phonetic. Um, Maybe we are talking on the one hand about very generic words, nouns or verbs, and placeholders are something else. Of course,
Well, one.
this can be proved only if you have agreement. In Malay, you don't have agreement, so you cannot prove anything about. I don't know. What do you think about this?
Well, we do have a word for thing. Now, it is a borrowing from Datoga, Gashenga. Um, so, could you know, as I said, many placeholder words come from a word for thing. So, might this have been an old word for thing that had been replaced? Well, the function of we see it's never used as a known thing. It's, oh, thank you. What's his face? What's her face? Show gender. Yeah. Or Mr. So and so, Ms. So and so, in a way, shows gender. But yeah, I'd throw it back at you, Mauro, and say, yeah, just because that's the way European languages do it doesn't mean that that's the way Hadza does it. And it was explicitly given to me with the translation of thing, kind of. I don't remember what the
Mhm.
Swahili was, nani, or something. That I had translated it with whatchamacallit in English. Um,
Yeah,
because
but
the
maybe
when
you
you
are.
don't know what it is thing was in there in the translation I was given. So
Uh-uh.
so
Uh,
from its how it occurs in the natural text and how speakers translate it would indicate that it is a whatchamacallit term. So
yeah,
um yeah.
and probably I am mixing placeholders and other things because what would you say? I mean, is a filler, not a placeholder. Something like I mean, or in Italian is cioè, in English is Arabic, in Arabic is yani, which means it means something that you put in when you don't know how to, that you're missing a word, that you're not remembering a word. That's not a placeholder, it's a more of a filler. I don't know. I am.
Shall I go back to the slide that when it has the Packendorf and Rose typology of placeholders versus fillers? So I would say take it up with them. Don't take it up with me.
You're right. You're right. Okay. Thank you.
I should say that in the Woodburn work, he always used to translate iname with thingummy, which was the first time I'd ever encountered that, but apparently that's a British thing. Thingummy, maybe British of a certain time period. So I
Uh-huh.
see that Bonnie has put up the slide on screen. Bonnie, would you like to speak to that any more?
Yeah, so it sounds like Mauro, what you were referring to is what they would call placeholders. Yeah.
Mm, mm, mm.
And we had a question of whether the Hadza placeholder could replace an entire noun phrase versus a noun. Our intuition is that it can replace an entire noun phrase or an entire verb phrase, but we had difficulty in actually testing that.
Mm, mm. Thank
But Margarita has a question, so do feel free, Margarita.
Okay. Um, I have two questions. One is out of ignorance, I would say. I wanted to ask first question I mean, why we call hunt, hunter-gatherer languages. Like, it sounds weird to me. I don't know why, but because for example, would we say consumist languages? I don't know, or communist languages? Because I'm very no, it's out of ignorance, really, because I'm more I mean, comfortable with the terms European languages, I don't know, indigenous languages, Bantu, whatever, but we define them in terms of, or Khoisan languages. But why do we call it hunter-gatherer languages? Do they have something in common that makes us want to call it in this way?
Well, if Tom is here, he might want to address that, as he is one of the editors of the Linguistics of Hunter-Gatherer Languages volume. Um, well, I mean, it is a good question for us to think about. Partly, we're trying to avoid a term like Khoisan, which we don't believe to have any validity,
Yeah, yeah,
or
okay.
yeah, or a term like click language, which in this case has nothing to do with the grammatical function. Um, the reason why we were using it in this case was because we were combining languages spoken in Botswana with this Hadza language, and it was kind of a theme when we're three languages is not a survey of African languages. It was just, again, kind of a response to the call for papers, which was trying to be on kind of more majority languages. But some of the Siberian languages are themselves also hunter-gatherer languages. So yeah, in a lot of ways, the term is not super useful. I don't know, Andrew. Do you want to comment on that?
No, I think that your sort of review makes good sense. I mean, essentially the term doesn't really have any sort of real, I think, utility perhaps the past perhaps the utility or the meaning of maybe a small
Small
scale,
scale,
and other sort of signifiers.
non-literate society. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, certainly, these things can all be picked apart, right? So Tom, maybe you go ahead, and I'm looking on my shelf here now, the language of hunter-gatherers,
Yes, I was going to say
volume.
that the book I co-edited is not hunter-gatherer languages, but the languages of hunter-gatherers. And it is, for linguists, it is an empirical question whether there is any correlation between subsistence and language. And this not only for foraging communities, but the question, for instance, in our book is just that reflex of the fact that in particular languages of hunter-gatherers are tend to be notoriously underdescribed or misrepresented or etc., etc. So that's why it's a collective volume. And there is one article which actually tries to test whether languages of hunter-gatherer are any different from languages of other cultural groups, and they find out no, they are not any different. So at least in the book I co-edited, there is no essentialization of anything like a typical hunter-gatherer language, if that is what you asked, Margarita.
Yeah, I did I understand correctly? Like we did not find a better term to describe it without using Khoisan, because I do not agree with Khoisan as well. Like we discussed this in Professor Harvey lectures, and I think it's something that we should revise. But yeah. I mean, this was did I understand correctly?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, none of us wanted to commit to writing a full paper ourselves, but we thought that combining two different languages, we would have enough for a paper. I mean, but this is goes back to, African languages often being marginalized in the literature. If you don't have that depth of research to have a paper comparable to what someone might have on Polish or English or German or something, one often feels, oh, I can't contribute. Yet this is our way of saying, no, despite our much more limited corpus, we should still say something, because otherwise these claims get made that are inaccurate.
I wanted to, this is more linguistic question. Do we see some loans from Swahili in the, what did you call them in English? Placeholders? Like, for example, since we know that most of them are bilingual, right? Like they speak Swahili very good. I see this, for example, in myself, since I speak English a lot. Sometimes it turns out that I just speak to Italian people and I say wherever, like, or whatever, while I'm just talking in English, in Italian, sorry. So I wanted to know if this phenomenon occurs in Hadza as well, in Hadzane as well.
Well, generally, discourse markers are quite easy to borrow, but remember that these placeholders are, yeah, they're integrated into the gender and numbers marking system. So, yeah, that nani in Swahili, right? It's got a particular intonation. I can't say that I've ever heard a Hadza person use it, and nani is also a personal name in Hadza, which makes it even less likely that you would want to say nani. Um, so I'd say other discourse markers, yes, uh, like oh, help me out, Andrew. It has been 30 years since I've been to Tanzania, so
So I mean, you can go or you can go atonena for like right now, or you can say gashenga or ihia for thing, and
but like for a Swahili one that people would throw in.
well, the nani would be the ideal candidate. I'm just lucky I had my corpus open next to me, and I looked, and I have not one instance of that occurring in the Hadza.
I know I say okay constantly when I'm trying to speak Swahili or Hadza.
Now
I'm
I
like,
do have
okay,
I do
okay.
have Yani in the corpus. So, well, actually, this is a full code switch. Actually, he says Yani ni fuluneya. So fulu means to be full in it. It's a colloquial Swahili, and the ni is a Swahili copula, and so he starts that by saying Yani, which is a Swahili like moreover, obviously borrowed from the Arabic. So I don't have any good examples of Yani as a used in what I would call a full Hadza phrase. So I think, yeah, there's some interesting stuff. I mean, certainly there's not everything has been described in the paper. Giuseppe.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, Prof. Tosco questions made me think that I find really curious that Adza have like verbal phraseholders, and I thought that because Prof. Tosco were talking about the boundary between a filler and a placeholder. And I thought that I don't know, in the example you showed, the verb was marked as third singular. Then, if it was like a filler, I would expect it to be like a first singular, such as like I mean in English. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm messing it up. So I know it wasn't exactly a question, but don't know if you have any thought about this.
No, I don't think we use it in that kind. That's used in that kind of I mean kind of. Well, we don't have any examples in the natural corpus that we've looked through, right? Um, where was that verb example? We have another where it seems to have replaced a verb with the ending, the nominalized ending from natural speech. So there again, it wasn't in the kind of I mean, then he's such and such to me. So you're not, the first person is not even the subject of that sentence. it's a he, which is presumably why the verb then is in the the third person masculine singular agreement, because the subject of the sentence is the third singular masculine.
Also, I find it curious that Hadza is actually a placeholder for adjective, which is kind of peculiar, I would say.
Well,
I
as
don't
we
know.
saw
From
in
my
the
point of view,
very
it's kind of
small
weird.
survey, because the survey of 56 languages didn't include information about what was replaced. Yeah, we did have adjectives replaced by the Indonesian placeholder. But this, I mean, this is a type of a word that's really cross-linguistic study of it is in its infancy, I would say. So I guess we don't know what's weird yet and what isn't. And by the way, Margarita, a weird is an acronym for weird languages. What is it? So
White.
kind of the opposite of a hunter-gatherer language in a way, right? The white, educated, industrialized. What does the other two letters stand for? Just as a criticism of a lot of, say, psychology studies. In fact, that it's the weird languages that are the weird ones, not the hunter-gatherer languages, because all humans spoke hunter-gatherer languages 10,000 years ago.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of the Hadza Symposium 2026. Very first dedicated Hadza Symposium, as far as I know. All that remains is to thank Bonnie for being our anchor leg of this symposium. And hopefully we get a chance, the stars will align and we'll get a chance to do something like this again.